reasons that people have that they've convinced themselves that they're supposed to be against DACA recipients, against immigration generally. And I think they cite the economy because they're looking for something solid. It's like, okay, I have all these emotional reasons why I feel against this stuff, but I need something substantive. I need something logical and that I can put numbers to and say, well, look, it's hurting this. It's costing this. It's doing this. And so it's something concrete and objective, they imagine. The problem is it's wrong. It's not true. And those arguments don't make sense. They have to really twist and torture things in order to make it sound like there's an argument to be made there. Or they just come out and lie like Sessions did. And that's really disturbing, that the emotional argument is so weak, and the objective, the rational argument is virtually non-existent, but the emotional feeling that compels it is so strong that they don't care, that they don't have much of an argument either way. They just go ahead and lie, or allow other people to lie, and just let it go because they feel so strongly about it. That's disturbing to me, because that's virtually impossible to argue with. I don't even know how you argue with that. Okay, anyway, moving onwards, more on DACA, since that's the latest horrible thing the administration has done. This is an article from The Atlantic entitled "From Dream Jobs to Bussing Tables Again." And, again, I don't like to make the economic argument, but since people seem to need these rational, objective things to lean on, I want to be sure that listeners have plenty of ammunition to refute those, so that when somebody does bring that up, like, well, my reason is this, you can say, no, you're wrong, here's why. Let's talk about the real reason, which is your feelings. You feel that you don't like it. It bothers you because it feels like a bad thing. Let's talk about that, because that's the only thing you have to defend. Your so-called rational or objective arguments do not stand. So here is another article along those same lines. From dream jobs to bussing tables again. America Hernandez, who is now 34, can divide her working life into two periods: before DACA protections kicked in and after. Before the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program was created in 2012, Hernandez, whose parents brought her to the U.S. from Mexico when she was 3 months old, was not eligible to work legally in the United States. Until her late 20s, she cobbled together a living working at various restaurants. Not what she wanted to do when she graduated with a bachelor's degree from Fresno State in 2003. She'd had 2 job offers in marketing in the 6 figures upon graduating, she told me, but she'd had to turn them down because she didn't have the proper papers. But DACA, which was created by President Obama without congressional input, allowed Hernandez to work in the type of job that college had prepared her for. She returned home to Fresno from Chicago, where she'd been working in a restaurant, and got what she calls her dream job, providing free legal representation for unaccompanied children with an organization called Kids in Need of Defense, or KIND. Once DACA happened, I could come back here and do what I love to do, she told me. Hernandez, whose work permit expires in October of 2018, told me that now that the Trump administration has rescinded DACA, she'll sell the house she bought in 2015, put that money toward living expenses, and then go back to working restaurant jobs if Congress doesn't extend DACA or pass a more permanent fix. Across the country, tens of thousands of immigrants who benefited from DACA are now facing the prospect of returning to lives they thought they'd left behind, in which they can't do the jobs their education allows them to do. They will again have to work grueling jobs in tenuous and unlawful arrangements, moving down the economic ladder they worked so hard to climb. We enabled DACA recipients to take a crack at what their economic potential is. Now we're pulling the rug out as they're hitting their stride in their lives and careers. Tom K. Wong, a political science professor at the University of San Diego, told me. Before President Trump suspended it last week, DACA had been protecting roughly 800,000 people who had been living in the U.S. since at least 2007, were younger than 16 when they arrived, and were younger than 31 when DACA was created. DACA recipients were assured by the federal government that they could pursue employment and that they wouldn't be deported, an assurance that lasted 2 years, after which recipients could apply to renew their protections. The reversal of DACA has huge implications for recipients' lives and also for the larger economy as a whole. You want people operating in work environments and jobs where we're making the most of their abilities, Joseph Paria, a fellow at the Brookings Institution, told me. Having people work in jobs they're far overqualified for leads to lost output for the economy. What's more, economists have increasingly emphasized that college education is key to upward economic mobility. But once current DACA recipients' work permits expire, they won't be able to put their college degrees to use, often after spending tens of thousands of dollars of their own money on it, since they weren't eligible for loans. DACA helped many achieve a kind of economic mobility typically unavailable to undocumented people. Its success is perhaps an indicator of what even more immigrants, given the proper papers, could achieve. According to a survey of 3,063 DACA recipients by Wong for the left-leaning Center for American Progress, 69% of respondents moved to a job with better pay after receiving DACA. 54% moved to a job that better fits my education and training, and 54% moved to a job that better fits my long-term career goals. The respondents said their hourly wages increased by 69% after they received DACA protections, with average wages jumping to $17.46 an hour from $10.29 an hour. A separate survey of 452 DACA recipients from UCLA found that 79% of recipients got what they considered to be a better job after DACA, and 64% earned a higher salary. DACA allowed people to build a career. That was a game changer. Wei Lai, the program coordinator for Aspire, a group advocating for Pan-Asian undocumented youth, told me. The program didn't just help people with a college degree, according to Roberto Gonzalez, a sociologist at Harvard who has conducted some of the most extensive studies of DACA's effects. It also helped people with less education pursue vocational education and workforce development opportunities that would have been unavailable to them. Such workers went from jobs that paid $5 to $7 an hour to jobs that paid $14 to $16 an hour. Because they could work legally, they felt empowered to pursue these kinds of investments in human capital. DACA also meant that recipients could push back against employers who treated them poorly, something that wasn't usually possible for people without papers. According to Wong's survey, 56% of recipients moved to a job with better working conditions. For Hugo Romero, DACA meant the difference between being a warehouse worker forced to put in unpaid overtime and being able to use his economics degree from Cal State Fullerton as a project manager and organizer at the UCLA Labor Center. Romero, now 26, remembers sitting in his car before his early shift at the warehouse, listening on the radio to President Obama describe DACA and thinking his life might change. Romero had worked at a car wash in addition to his warehouse job, and says he saw employers abuse workers like him who couldn't push back because they were undocumented. Those experiences pushed him toward labor advocacy. DACA allowed me to do that without having to work 2 or 3 minimum wage jobs on the side. Without it, my advocacy would be limited to volunteerism on top of trying to survive, he said. In addition to letting recipients hold jobs they previously couldn't have, DACA also put people on the economic grid. They could finally get driver's licenses, qualify for health insurance, and legally buy cars and homes. Hernandez, the kind worker, had left Fresno initially because she was afraid of driving to work without a license, which she couldn't previously get because of her immigration status. She'd already been pulled over twice and given tickets for driving without a license. She knew a third infraction might lead to jail time. DACA allowed her to get a license. Romero was finally able to get health insurance after DACA. Jonathan Jays Green, who migrated to Maryland from Panama when he was 13, was able to get a loan and finish college in 4 years, rather than stringing together jobs to pay for his education. Last year, he bought a house. Now these privileges have been put on hold. Romero had been planning to buy a car, but is no longer sure he can fulfill a 5-year loan. He's gearing up for losing his job and his health insurance when his permit expires in 2019. I talked to a 35-year-old DACA recipient in Fresno named Maria Duran, who had been planning to buy a house soon after having established good credit under DACA. DACA allowed her to get a full-time job for a California assembly member and start donating some of her income to nonprofits in her community. It really opened a lot of doors for me that had not been opened before, she said. Gonzalez, the Harvard professor, says DACA recipients have grown into lifestyles that gave them better careers, which allowed them to spend more, buying houses and cars and putting their kids into daycare. If Congress doesn't revive the program, one-time DACA recipients will likely pare down their lifestyles, taking kids out of daycare, losing their cars, getting foreclosed on their homes. This mechanism allowed them to live out the American dream. If it gets taken away, what's going to happen? He said. The Cato Institute, a libertarian think tank, estimates that immediately deporting DACA recipients, something Trump has said will not happen, could lead to $280 billion in lost economic growth over the next decade, mainly due to lost tax revenues and the absence of immigrants' children who tend to earn more than their parents. And there are other dimensions to losing a job. When undocumented youth initially find that they won't be able to live normal lives, they become disillusioned and depressed, according to Gonzalez, who has studied how undocumented people react when they find out they are undocumented. They struggle mentally as they adjust their expectations of what they can achieve in American society, knowing that they can't hold professional jobs. They experience a tremendous fall, he writes, after realizing that their hard work and educational achievement won't garner the rewards they thought they would. Many DACA recipients are now preparing for a similar fall. Angel Berrigan already got a taste of what it's like to lose DACA protections. Berrigan, who came to the U.S. in 2002 when she was 10, received DACA protection in 2012, but because of a paperwork glitch, he lost his deferred action status temporarily in 2015. Berrigan was working as a teacher at the time and had to stop teaching and give up his driver's license. He became depressed, he told me, because he could no longer do the job he loved. It made me feel like I had wasted my time, he said. My whole life had been geared towards being an amazing educator, and I couldn't do it anymore. If DACA goes away entirely, tens of thousands of people will be similarly crushed. Still, none of the DACA recipients I talked to said they were considering leaving the United States, even if Congress does not keep any parts of the program. What they'll do instead is leave behind their careers and their education and return to the underground economy. So, I hope you were watching/listening last week and heard last week's show. We had 2 DACA recipients on talking about their lives and their situations. And if you were, I'm sure you recognize the humanity of them. If you didn't get to see the show, I suggest you go to the YouTube and look for CU Immigration and see if you can find it. I think it was episodes 127 and 128, I believe. And just watch it for a few minutes and think about who these people are. And then think about what this does to them, and think about the immigration situation writ large. And ask yourself, are we really heading in the right direction with these people that want to crush that, to shut it down, to send people away? I know what I think, but I'm interested in having other people learn a little more about this. So our next article, even more frightening, or not more frightening than the last one, but more frightening, more things that are frightening, is entitled "The Next DACA? Trump Administration Turns to Another Class of Immigrants." This is from CNN. So as the nation's immigrant community grapples with President Donald Trump's decision to end the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, a similar move could be looming for hundreds of thousands of other immigrants who have been permitted to build lives in the United States, in some cases for decades. At issue is temporary protected status, a provision of immigration law that allows the government to grant temporary work authorizations and protection from deportation to immigrants, including otherwise undocumented ones, from certain countries where life remains dangerous. Conditions that could merit the status include armed conflict and civil war, natural disasters, epidemics, and other extraordinary and temporary conditions. In the next 6 months, the Trump administration will weigh whether to extend the status for several countries whose immigrants have lived in the United States for as long as 20 years, with a decision to end that status potentially upending their lives. All told, more than 440,000 people in the United States are protected by the program. The Department of Homeland Security is overdue for a decision about Sudan and South Sudan. There are 1,039 temporary protected immigrants from Sudan in the United States and 49 from South Sudan, according to data provided by U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Their status is set to expire November 2nd, and federal law requires a decision 60 days before the deadline and timely publication of that decision. Reached for comment about the decision, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services issued a statement that said, quote, "The Secretary has made a determination and USCIS will publish a Federal Register notice shortly." USCIS would not provide the decision that had been reached. The expiration deadlines for decisions on Haiti, Honduras, and Nicaragua, which have much larger populations of temporarily protected immigrants than the United States, are in January, meaning a decision will be due in November. Haiti's temporary protected status was set to expire in July, but former Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly, who has since become White House Chief of Staff, opted to extend it for 6 months. But when Kelly extended the status for Haiti, which was designated in 2011 after an earthquake devastated the island, he warned the nearly 58,700 recipients living in America to prepare their affairs for going back to Haiti or find another way to apply to stay in the United States. That sent a shockwave through the broader community of temporarily protected immigrants, which fears the warning was a sign of things to come. More than 86,000 Hondurans and more than 5,300 Nicaraguans are protected under the program. El Salvador's temporary protected status is up for expiration in March. Salvadorans make up more than 263,000 of the immigrants who are temporarily protected, and they have been living in the United States since 2001. Trump has been especially harsh on immigrants from Central America in public remarks, blaming them for violence by the gang MS-13, which exists in its largest concentrations outside the United States in El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. That further adds to the concern that acting Homeland Security Secretary Elaine Duke could decide to end the protection for Central Americans. It's going to be devastating to those families if the program ends, and they typically are families, so you often have children that have grown up in the United States, people who are gainfully employed, settled in communities, said Leon Rodriguez, a former director of USCIS, now working as an immigration attorney. So the impact from a family perspective, from a workplace perspective, from a community perspective, is quite serious. According to the rules, not everyone from the countries designated is automatically protected. Only people who can show they've continually lived in the United States since the triggering event or subsequent designated times are eligible. For example, Sudan was first designated in 1997 and was redesignated in 1999, 2004, and 2013. To qualify for protections from El Salvador, recipients must have lived in the United States since 2001. And for Honduras, it's 1998, meaning any revocation of the program would upend lives built in the United States for nearly 20 years. Lawmakers have been pressing the Trump administration to preserve temporary protected status for the countries whose deadlines for redesignation are coming up soon, citing the communities that would be harmed. At a meeting in July with members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, then Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly indicated he could end Haiti's status but hadn't made a decision on Central America. In addition to the humanitarian concerns, supporters of the program point to analysis that show an economic impact from revoking it. If El Salvador terminates, literally 260,000 eligible workers will fall out of the workforce at the stroke of midnight on whatever day that happens. An analysis by the Immigration Legal Resource Center, which advocates for pro-immigration policies, found that deporting all the immigrants from El Salvador, Honduras, and Haiti who have temporary protected status would cost $3.1 billion and take away $6.9 billion in contributions to Social Security and Medicare and $45.2 billion to the gross domestic product over a decade. Turnover costs for their employers would total nearly $1 billion. There's different elements to the concern, said Representative Zoe Lofgren, a Democrat from California. First, in the case of people who've been here a considerable period of time, people become members of their community, and so a couple decades later, you own businesses, you have families, you have grandchildren. You're kind of part of our situation here. Lofgren said the designated countries often remain in dire straits, and sending people back to them would be unwise. The program is one of the issues that Congress needs to tackle as part of immigration reform because insisting on keeping recipient status temporary becomes untenable, she said. There should be some rational way to transition people who have been here for a long time, and in the case of these people, they've been here in legal status, who because of the length of their stay have basically become valued members of our community, Lofgren said. That's a matter of change of immigration law. So, as if DACA wasn't enough, and it didn't harm enough people, we have this looming on the horizon. The cancellation of the protected status for people from several different countries, all of who've been here for a long, long time. So with DACA students, you have people that grew up here. With the protected status, you have people that have been living here and some people who've grown up here. At some point, when you look at this stuff and you think about what this does to communities, what it does to families, what it does to friendships, what it does to jobs, businesses, all sorts of things, even leaving aside the money. Let's not even talk about the money. But when you think of what this does to all these people and all these different networks that they've created, and then you try to think, okay, what's the positive? What positive benefit do we get from doing this? I can't think of a single one. Can you? I cannot think of a single positive benefit that comes from sending away DACA recipients, from sending away the people with this protected status who've been here for so long. Can't think of a single thing. The only thing that I can imagine that somebody thinks, that makes somebody think this is a good idea, this kind of thing is a good idea, is that they emotionally dislike immigrants. They don't like people that are different, who speak different languages, who look different, who have different customs or religions, funny names that they can't pronounce. That's all I can think of. It has to be something like that. And it has to be such a strong repulsion that it overcomes your sense of humanity that makes you think, well, you know, weird and funny and different though they may be, and as uncomfortable as they make me, they've been here for a long time. They're a part of something. They have families. They have friends. They have jobs. Maybe I should just, not look at them, not think about them, not worry about it. Even though it really bugs me, maybe I should just not worry about it. Somehow you have to get past that and just see difference as somehow a removal of humanity. You have to just not be able to think about the lives of these people. I don't know. Is it like they sit there and think, oh, they've just been living in a cave all this time doing this stuff? So it's no big deal if they go back. I don't know. I don't know how you can conceive of this and make it something that's okay for yourself, that seems okay to you. It's just utterly beyond me. I don't understand it. And I hope, if you've stuck with me for the last hour and you've been listening to this, that you're at least having a little bit of a hard time understanding it yourself. And you think, maybe I should do something about this. Maybe I should call my congressman. Maybe I should write a letter to somebody. Maybe I should speak up on Facebook next time somebody makes a rude comment about immigrants and say, wait a minute. There's another side to this story, because there is. There are lots and lots. There are hundreds of thousands. There are perhaps as many as 11 million or more other sides to this story. And you need to talk to those people to find out what their side is. Why are they here? Why did they come here? What kind of life have they made here since they've been here? Who have they touched? Who have they helped? So, you've been listening to CU Immigration here on WRFU LP, Urbana, 104.5 FM, or UPTV. I hope you got something out of the show. And I hope that you will tune in again and see us in the future. And until then, we'll talk to you later.